to our members of the public who are here and from the media to be part of the UK Care Board. Welcome to everybody who's members of the board, of course, those who are here for the private board this morning. A particular welcome to Katrina and Joe, who are from our Locality partnership. We're going to do the first session, which is a little bit about the work they're doing in the Locality partnership, and then maybe some questions, and I've suggested maybe some challenges for us as a board. But apologies. Where's Sarah? Sarah.
We've had apologies from Joe Walker, John Caput, Stephen Peacock, Deborah El Said, and Joe Memphis.
Lovely, thank you, Sarah. So, any declarations of interest that people haven't recorded previously that we need to be aware of? No? Okay, thanks very much. Without further ado, then I'll pass over to Katrina and Joe. I say this is your opportunity to let us know what you're doing in the Locality Partnership. What we're trying to do since we started the Integrated Care Board is to move around different locations and allow people from our 6 locality partnerships to come and talk about the things that they're seeing working or not, and then maybe some questions to the board, and I'm sure the board has some questions for you as well. So, welcome, and over to you.
Hello, hi, I'm Katrina Bruton, I'm a GP in the city. I'm an East, I'm in the actual East, I'm in Fish Ponds. I think our population is about 175,000. We've got 3 primary care networks and 12 GP practices. It's an area of high deprivation. I think some of the wards are in some of the most deprived in our area, and with that become this their life expectancy is much lower, and our populations are experiencing ill health at an earlier age. Their frailty levels are at an earlier age as well. There's also a very young population. If you look at the slide, you can see they are very young, and that is partly because of some of the populations we are, but also because of the frailty and ill health at a younger age. If you look at the sort of the 5 impactful conditions by age, they also quite reflect by high levels of mental health, alcohol, and then slightly in the sort of older age group, you've got conditions that are coming in like diabetes, and the complications they're getting from these conditions are often at a younger age. And I think that's they're experiencing more deprivation and then more ill health as well as a result of that. So it's also a very diverse population, and English is not often the first language. A lot of our population needs support with interpreters, and often have quite different health beliefs, and we have to reflect our services to make sure we manage care to reflect that. So what is our aim? And our aim is to understand and address these health inequalities of these people, and make sure they have equitable access in quality and experience, and then hopefully improvement in their health outcomes. We've got a very diverse board, with really reflects the population well, and really good engagement. And with that, we've been able to, with some of our work streams, really help co-produce a lot of our work, so that we're trying to make our services and what we do very much being led by our population. And this is proper co-production, she says properly. It means a lot of input, it means a lot of groups and a lot of time. It isn't, here's what we planned, have a look at it, do you agree? It's very much, this is the problem, how should we look at it in a different way? And one of the really good examples, I think, is the COVID vaccination programs, where we really looked at vaccinating this population, our populations, in a completely different way, and I think the uptake in our areas was much higher than we had expected, because we did things differently. And we're really keen that we do continually do things differently to meet this population. And we're really excited at the start of this process when the community mental health projects came through with quite additional funding. slightly worried about how the funding calculations going forward perhaps aren't really reflecting about the health inequalities. And I really I'm coming to you as the board saying, please, to reduce health inequalities in this area, we really need to invest in different services to improve our population. But these can't be services that we decided are right. We need to ensure that these services are co-produced and really reflect our population, because then we should begin to see a change. And it's long term, it takes a while, and we really need to embrace our population. So I think Joe's got some more bits about our work we've done to date.
Thank you, Katrina. So, just to look at a few of our priorities. Katrina's touched on this one a bit already. We have got that very strong culture of co-production. We've enacted that through the COVID work, as Katrina said, but also through a lot of our mental health work. We've had a lived experience reference group, a community and faith group, and a workforce group, and our mental health group itself is co-chaired by a person of lived experience. So as Katrina said, we're really putting people and communities and the BCSC at the centre of our design and delivery work. Continuous development of the locality, again, Katrina alluded to it previously, but we've moved recently to really try to make sure our partnership board is reflective of our population and the people we serve. So we engage people not just get their views, but engage them in the decision-making process, development centre decision-making process. A non-medicalised approach to delivering care is something that we've sought to focus on and thought about a lot, particularly in relation to our mental health work, thinking about how we can use community assets, social prescribing and different approaches to health and well-being from some of the more traditional medical approaches to support people to stay happy and healthy and well in their communities. And we're currently delivering our community mental health framework response, and that means that we're starting to put into place our integrated personalised care team, our integrated mental health team, working with the BNSSG programme to make sure there's a degree of continuity across the system, but also tailoring it to make sure it reflects our values that are alluded to in the previous slide, to make sure that it's not an overly medicalised approach, and that it takes account of those community assets and strengths in that community and populations. Leading on from that is the community inclusion service, which was something that we had invested a lot of our additional resources that Katrina referred to into, and that's about employing recovery navigators or link workers to be embedded in specific communities who are most marginalised and experience the worst outcomes. So the Somali population, the African Caribbean population, Eastern European, Southeast Asia. Specific identified individuals to sit within those communities to improve access and drive better outcomes for those populations. We've been doing a bit of work around children and young people as young people's mental health and healthy way. As Katrina alluded to earlier, we've got a young population, and this was a priority for us from the outset. And we're currently enacting a grants process to support some small community projects in those areas to improve the outcomes for some of our young people. And we're just starting, along with the other localities and the system more generally, to really focus on delivery of the National Aging World programme, thinking about how we can deliver those national strands of anticipatory care, enhanced health and care homes, but also thinking about some of the things that are specific to our local population, and we've identified through kind of wide stakeholder engagement, loneliness, and early ageing, because I think, again, as Katrina said, people in ICE tend to show the signs of ageing at a younger age than some of the other areas of BNSSG. So those are our focuses, and working with Sorella on Falls as well. The next page, I won't say too much more, the next page just kind of demonstrates where we are with each of those areas of work with the mental health fund, having been in training for longer, been really part of our delivery phase, and the ageing well in particular being in a kind of more planning and discovery phase the other one. And the next slide, if you're looking at the slide, is a bit more detail about how we enact co-production. And just finally, the final slide just shows the range of partners that we're engaging with in the partnership board. And we haven't got the Somali Resource Centre on here, but I think hopefully it captures that diversity of use from statutory providers to BCSC and lived experience partners as well. So, yeah, happy to leave it there to take any questions from the board.
Thanks, Katrina. Thanks, Joe. Questions from board members? A chance to just check out what's happening in our localities, or or whether you've got any questions for us as a board. So just around the room, any questions or observations? Jay?
Thanks, Rick. You raised the issue of resource moving forward. I mean, it would be helpful to explore that a bit more, because clearly this year, when we look into this year, we know we're moving away from a non-recurrent resource base into something more recurrent. We are clear that there is money that we're bringing in from localities. So how, in your view, how far away are we from delivering what you want compared to the money you think you're going to get? Because we are starting, when I asked Sarah to just articulate, we're confident that we can get some recurrent money into the locality. It'd be interesting to understand, you know, what you think the gap might be.
I think providing services to this population is more expensive, and it is resource heavy. Things like the community fusion program, that sort of resource, working with partners who work within their communities, and not providing help in the ways we have, so not necessarily. So like the vaccination program was not all done out of our practices, it was done out of different areas, mosques and other places where people felt much more confident. And actually I think if we're going to engage, we need to do things differently, because continuing to do what we've done before has widened the health inequalities. And I think we need to resource this to make a difference. You know, I think a lot of, like, diabetes is one of our focuses. A lot of our, you know, understanding about diabetes, and a lot of the education and the literature has all not reflected the populations we're now needing to target. We need to have everything available, really down into the grassroots level to actually make a difference. But that's much more expensive. And a lot of the formulas that have been used previously haven't really reflected that investment that's needed to make a difference.
And could I then ask from a Sarah, a Dave and a Colin perspective, because there's resource and money coming from all different directions, how confident we would feel that we can address that this year?
I mean, I think really the issue you're raising is about the form that we use to distribute to different localities, and I think there's some work that's gone on in Leicestershire that's specifically focusing on health inequalities. I'd be really happy to have a conversation with you and share some of that, so that we can think about the methodology in which we distribute that funding.
I mean, I'll just picture it as talk to Alison now. It continue to raise and drive that inequality lens in here and through all our decision-making processes, and clearly need to refine the way that we adapt our formulas as we go forward. This, our absolute intent, our decisions are driven by that inequality lens. Certainly at the Primary Care Committee, which you're a member of, Katrina, that you see decisions now being driven with that lens. We must continue to do that, and we will continue to do that. The new funding shape which you've alluded to is still new. It's recurrent money for services for our localities. You know, we haven't declared all of it yet into the partnership, still part of that planning round, but it's coming. We must ensure that inequality lens is focused on that.
Thanks, Dave. I've got Steve, Maria, and then Jay.
Thank you for your presentation, and again, well done on the work of real co-production. I think it's a really good example. When you were doing that, what were the barriers you needed to overcome to reach the hard-to-reach communities? Because you've got a very diverse community base. So how did you get them to engage, and what do we learn from that? How can we start to learn from what you've done in your patch? Because I guess in the end we're going to have to redesign services, and that's at the nub of this. So what did you discover, I guess, in terms of how to redesign that we all need to know about?
So I think for our community mental health work, we started at the very beginning and made sure that representation from those communities was at the centre of the group we set up. So we had a mental health transformation group we established. From the outset, it was co-chaired by a GP and a person with lived experience who replied to us, who had sourced through the Independent Mental Health Network, really valuable individual. But we also had somebody from the Smiley Resource Centre, somebody from the Lari, somebody from Bristol Black Carers, VCSE outweighing those statutory members, I think. And those people, those individuals and those organisations had links into their communities and were able to bring that knowledge in from the outset. So we also had, as I referenced earlier, a lived experience reference group, and we took all of our ideas to ask them initially how they thought the community mental health model should look, frontline workers as well as community and faith groups. So I think we really established specific groups and made sure that specific community representation set the middle of that process.
Did you get the diversity of age within those groups? Because what might work for our elderly certainly probably won't work for younger populations, even within mental health. In fact, probably particularly in mental health.
It's a good challenge. I don't think we did specifically at the outset think too much about age. Our children and young people's group, which is looking at children's because the mental health framework is only for adults. So we were specifically concerned about mental health in children and young people, and established a group to look specifically at that in a healthy way. There we had Bernardo's, and we did have representation from young people as part of that group. So perhaps there was a division there, I guess, in terms of the age, which was not forced, but because of the age cut-off in the community mental health framework.
I think we've also funded some, particularly for the board, we recognise we need to fund some of the voluntary sector to be able to attend, because it's not like they work for a statutory organisation where they've got something within their role. I don't know, I think there has been some questioning of that, but I think it was vital as well.
And sorry, just to follow on from that, we are working with a team at the ICB who recently drafted a policy to support, based on national guidance, to support funding VCSE organisations, in particular brokers who participate in those in these kinds of activities. So I think that was correct framework.
Just one comment back. I think when we're using social prescribing, but all of the voluntary organisations that we may be commissioning to deliver fantastic services, the big issue for them is that they have no certainty. So they go from project to project. And actually, if we had got some funding that could provide them with continuity, that would be not a bad way of thinking about investments going forward, because they have such a big impact and reach those communities. Whereas project to project, it's really difficult.
So thank you very much. I thought that analysis and your approach is really fantastic to see, particularly focused down so well. I suppose two questions. One is the ability to influence in school and young people's mental health, and are there any particular programs going into local schools? And that might be a wider question given your profile from 18 onwards. And also when it comes to allocating, whether or not there is enough complexity, and Sarah might know this better than others, the complexity of a population, so that if you have comorbidity of physical and mental health, it's not additive, it's a multiplier, and whether that allocation in formula setting exists, or whether it's something we have to do an overlay on and move money around in accordance with that.
I think the children's, I don't think there is currently, the current project is for adults. So we have started to look at children because we felt it was an area of real need. I think there is more work we can do with the schools and ensuring that the work that the council has organised through schools work, and some of that work is coming through in our young people's, in the children and young people's group. But I think we are expecting to have funding related to children's mental health, but I don't know when we haven't heard when it's coming.
No, so I suppose that is a bit of a distinction. In the community mental health framework did come with some funding, and we have done lots of work around children's mental health, and school nurses are part of that group, children and young people's group, looking at operating mental health. But it's been a bit of a fact-finding, bit of a mapping exercise, just so we can start to think about. We have recently had a bit of money, so we can start to support some grants, as I said earlier. But essentially, that hasn't gone as rapidly as the children's mental health, just for that reason.
It's very difficult. The funding doesn't recognise the continuum of mental health, and the fact that people don't wake up on their 18th birthday with a whole new range of complexity around their mental health problems.
Thanks, Maureen. Yeah.
Sorry, did you?
I was only going to say there is a programme of mental health in schools, so there is.
It's across the 3 local authorities, but it is as opposed to being locality driven, it's sort of being SSG-wide driven down, and I think how we get some of that interconnectivity will need to work through as well.
And I think the transition is important, because at the moment I don't think there's a well thought out transition service. So there's often quite a lot of support if you get into CAMS, but then when you transition into the adult services, that completely drops away. And we find at the university at UAE, where my practice looks after you, it is as well. There's a lot of new students with RIE with significant mental health problems, and again making that sure that transition is recognised.
Part of mine is already been advised through my career in terms of what's happening with children and voluntary sector organisations, but I wanted to know, you've made a fair point about needing funds to have voluntary sector organisations play more of a part, but are you confident within your patch that you know who all the players are, and do you have some level of communication even if they're not able to participate or resources to participate?
I think we're really good at the inner city. I think we've been really effective. I think actually we've been less good in the east, and partly because of there's less inequality in the east. So I think, and we're probably less good with our older population, and I think we're beginning to work because the Aging Well programme is just beginning. We're beginning to think about how we ensure that the way the model we use the mental health we start to use with our elderly population, but it is harder.
Yeah, I get that. It's partly because we are looking at how we engage better with the voluntary sector, so they have to be part of our system if we're not already, and if the locality partnerships are already where we need to be, well that's a network already built that we don't have to recreate.
Thanks, Jane. Any other questions? Alison?
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, you've clearly set out real work with communities, and it comes through. When you look at your priorities, are you clear what success looks like? Because I think what I'm getting from you is you need to invest in working with people at the very beginning to take them. What does success look like for population serve? Are you clear you've got some measures so that when you get there, you can say, look, we're here, we've done it, well done. So in terms of milestones,
Very long-term plan. And, you know, I think we should have deliverables that are 5 to 10 years to see a reduction in health inequalities, but also begin to see services that reflect our population and how they want to live, rather than services that we expect them to fit in to. So that quite a lot of it is softer and it's less, and that's, I think, really important to us as well. And also we've also really invested in looking at constantly how, you know, not just this is what we've asked you to think about it now, but what do you continue to think about it? So continuing to invest and change and to make a difference, because actually we might not get it right, and I think that's also important. But I think it is some of the deliverables we're quite want to.
Just to add to that, I think there are particular communities where we can see from the data that there's a tendency at hospital or A&E for things at higher levels than you would expect relative to the population as a whole. And I think if you look at something like the community inclusion service, where we're hoping to have a Somali worker embedded in Eastern, as part of that community, known by the community, that they would be in a position to support those individuals who may need it to access services in the community, or go to their GP practice, or that we could have outreach in community centres or mosques, as we had in C19, and that would have an impact in a more short term, I guess, in some of those disparities in terms of attendance to secondary care, for example.
I think also things like Happy Health have worked with us to book things like smear appointments. So if you, and that's actively calling, and that's really made a difference, and we will hopefully begin to see the difference. And also if you come once to an appointment and feel like it's a good experience, and it isn't something that is scary, you'll hopefully next time think, well, maybe that's something I might choose to do.
Do you have any questions for us, Joel?
Sorry, can I just
hang on. That's on me, yeah. Don't jump in. No, John, I'll come to you in a second. Did you have any questions for us at the board?
No, it would be interesting to know what the funding is coming forward and what it's to be used for.
Okay. Because we've had that conversation about what money you're holding at the moment, what's committed, what's not. John, sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Katrina, from a general practice perspective, we hear a lot about challenges with estates and things for service delivery. In terms of eyes, do you have any specific constraints around primary care estate, considering primary care in the sort of broadest picture of dentistry, pharmacy, that kind of stuff?
I think there's huge issues with estate in all of the PCNs in ICE, and I think we looked at an opportunity to in the redevelopment of the Bristol centre about this might be something we could look at, but I think with some of the pressures, I think it is hard. So I think estates is definitely a big problem in all of primary care. I'm less aware of that dentistry, but I do know there's a big issues of just access to dentistry in our population. The NHS dentistry provision within the cities.
And is that wrapped into your locality approach?
We have had it in our approach, but we haven't really got any solutions.
So we participated in the system-wide estate strategy process that was done by the ICB, and that's going through into a BNSSG-wide estates prioritisation process. So I think as individual PCN practices and PCNs as a locality, we've identified what our priorities are and fed those into a system-wide discussion about.
I think like my practice we have 100 members of staff, but only 50 desktops. Workstations. So everyone has to work remotely at times because we don't have enough capacity. So I think that's reflected in a city PCN as well. So I think that the estates is a massive, because there's been a big population increase as well, and the estates haven't grown in primary care to reflect that.
Thanks, John. I've got Ellen and Dave.
Thanks, Katrina and Joe. Really interesting. Every time we have a board meeting, we generally sort of hear from an individual partnership, and quite humbled by the work that you do. Question for you is, do you feel supported by the ICB? Do you think the system is working for you? Is there anything more, you've asked for finances, so anything more that you would ask of the ICB? Dave, and it might not be for today, you might be for another time, I'd be really interested to understand how you're getting economies of scale across the various integrated partnerships, and how do you balance that with differences between different parts? So that would just be an interesting one.
I'd very much respond to that. So I think the community mental health journey is a really great example of that, and where we start with a very locality partnership, a very tailored approach, very differential approach, and the lesson is that actually there has to be a core service, a level of consistency of service across BNSSG, which we've now moved to. We then need to be clear with our partnership what element of the service can still be tailored at place. Community mental health has been a really good journey. I'll use good. It's been a journey to get us to that place. We need to learn that in all future service development, to be absolutely explicit with our partnership what is within their gift to tailor to place. Can I just add to this point that John was making? I think that the dentistry and pharmacy is absolutely the benefit of delegation from the first of April gives us the ability, obviously still working with a national contract, it gives us the ability to think about how we might lead the change at a more local level, far more than we've had previously, and we'll see that coming through our locality plans far more from that day. So I think we're just building on that conversation earlier about delegation. That's a clear advantage for us going forward.
Okay.
Do you have any answer on that? Do you feel as if we are fully supported? Is there anything more you'd ask of us?
I think Dave's expression was one that I was going to use actually, which is clarity about what's in their gift. And I don't think that's about the system not being supportive, but I think it has been a really difficult thing to pitch, because I think there's a tension, isn't there, between what you do sensibly across BNSSG to not make an unnecessarily complex system for providers and people to engage with. And then there's that local, how you respect and deliver to that local nuance, I think. I think we haven't quite got that down yet, but I think we've learned quite a lot in the past couple of years, and I think support to understand, continue to understand what our remit is specifically and what is within our gift estate, so would be good.
And I guess that's one of our exec team, the day we go making sure we've got that oversight and connection across our systems. Thank you both for your time today, really appreciate it. I know how busy you are, but I think this really gives a good sense for the ICB of what's happening coming out from here, and look at the balance sheet, so thank you, really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Thank you. Can I move us on then to the minutes of our last public board, which was on the 1st of December, and just ask whether there's any points anybody wants to raise with the minutes before I move on to the actions. No? Okay, thank you. So there's a few actions, some have been closed, there's a couple still open. So Shane was the first one there which you provided an update on about the purpose and aims of the new ICB. So it's been kept as open, but is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I suggest we can close it, Chair.
Okay, great, thanks very much. Then the next one's around the winter assurance framework, but that's on the agenda for today, Lisa, isn't it? So I'll leave that one for now. The ones on the independent advisory group, you'll see there that I've closed them because they will all happen as and when we establish it. Our equalities officer has moved on, which has created a bit of hiatus, but we're about to go to advert for a chair where we'll pay an honorarium for them to create the integrated, the independent advisory group and then establish the members of it. I've had some conversations with the Bristol Strategic Partnership as well to ensure we're not duplicating effort, and we're doing the same thing. So you will start to see that emerge now over the next weeks and months. And then the final ones on there was one for Joe on the Outcomes Performance and Quality Committee. And I'm not sure whether, Rosie, you can answer that one.
I haven't picked that one up, Joe. Apologies, so I will do checking the team like that.
Okay, thanks. If you come back to us now, that'd be good. And then Jaya, one from the People Committee around times of the minutes and approval to be sent to ICB board members. Okay, so we can close that one. And then the final one around coordination between committees. Well, we've created a monthly meeting between the committee chairs now, which will be the last Thursday of every month, which will be an agenda around the crossover between the 5 committees to make sure that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing on those, so that coordination will be there. Okay, there's a few more. Lisa and Rosie, the one around the NHS EI operating framework, that's still open, but
Bringing back in April.
okay. And the next one is for April. And there was a few here around the decision-making framework that are still open, Sarah.
Which I think, because it's about the health and care improvement groups, which I think Shane will pick up in the chief executive report.
Okay, great, thanks. Delegation of decision-making for winter expenditure, Lisa?
So we have received, since the request from the delegation, we received the national template that needs to be completed on a fortnightly basis and is being reviewed through the winter group. We're working through that to pull out an impact statement. We've got the 3rd submission this week. Once we've done that, we'll then be able to produce that impact assessment.
Okay, lovely, thank you, Lisa. The next one was around the Home First project initiation document to be circulated. Has that been circulated?
I believe it has been circulated.
Okay.
Double check.
I'll move us on then to the last couple. The one was around, that came out of the Finance Committee about the ICB exec team to consider whether subcommittee needed substructure support delivery. Shane, I don't know whether there's an update on that. I don't know whether you've got any other view on that one.
The challenge we're having is the connection between the improvement groups and the committees, because the idea of the committees having a substructure I don't think is a good idea, because I think you create an architecture below an architecture, and I think that just ends up being administratively unnecessary. But we will have our 4 improvement groups. They need to be wired into the committees if there are decisions that the groups are making that the committee should have oversight of. So rather than creating a substructure, we just need to connect the improvement groups into them. So for example, an improvement group may decide it wants to do A, B, and C. It may have a big people impact, or it may have a big quality impact. The committee should have a line of sight into those. Yeah.
So how are we making sure that's happening?
We haven't built the improvement groups yet. We will have either a report, or the improvement group would have a standing agenda item for the committees would have a standing agenda item which would allow the improvement group to present when they believe there is stuff to present.
And there will be overlap, so there will be overlap between the committees depending on what they're
Oh,
trying
yeah.
to do. So.
Sarah and I have met with a couple of colleagues, and we have those decision-making framework and how we use it to make decisions inside the ICB, either advisory from the HCP, financial decisions around funded care, and other financial decisions. So that's being built, so there's a lot more rigor there now, I think, Sarah.
Okay, great, thanks very much. And then the last one's around the question from a member of the public who responded to inviting Sarah. Okay, let me move us on then to the CEO's report. Shane.
Thank you, Chair. So as always, I've tried to pull out 3 or 4 big things that I think is important to share with the board and obviously the public arena. Everyone has a report, so I'm not going to read through the report line by line, Chair. The 4 areas I called out this month are the decision-making framework, particularly about improvement groups, which we started to talk about today. Where we are with our structures internally, and a lot has happened since the last board meeting. The winter headlines, although we do have a substantive item on the agenda about winter, and then our approach to planning. Obviously, in the closed session, we had a discussion about planning, but I think it's important that in the public section we can talk about what's happening in planning. So, you remember at the last board meeting, Chair, we talked about the decision-making framework, and we approved the decision-making framework. What we didn't do was go into any great detail about the improvement groups. Since that meeting, there have been conversations with chief executives at the executive group, and there have been individual conversations about putting flesh around the bones. We have a clear terms of reference now for the improvement groups, and you will see from the document, which what we're talking about, the 4 improvement groups: improving lives for children, improving lives in the community, improving lives for people with mental illness and learning disability and autism, and then improving outcomes in our hospitals through efficiency and effectiveness. I do hope that wording is appropriate now. We've had a lot of debate about the wording. But the idea is to create a space where we can bring, instead of having 191 projects, which we've had in the past, bring together the 3 or 4 big things that this system needs to do in line with our planning function. Those groups will be driven by a partnership approach, so that you can have a lead clinician, a lead partner, a lead executive who will be chairing those groups, and that clinician could be both health and social care. So it could be a social worker, it could be a nurse, it could be a doctor, it will be an executive member, and it will be partner members. And these groups will have the responsibility of driving the improvement in our system, both discovery, design, and implementation. So instead of having lots and lots and lots and lots of small projects, we, as a result of our 5-year plan and our strategy, will know what the big things are we want to do. This is the vehicle for delivering those. And they are not organisational, they are truly partnership-based. So that's so people will see in there, in the paper, I'm not going to go into detail about it, but the structure of the groups, etc. It is really important that this brings clarity to our improvement agenda, as opposed to lots and lots and lots and lots of activity. Because, as you will see from the next agenda item, as we move into our organisational structural changes, we as a system have to be clear that we can't afford to do 191 different things. We've got to become much more focused on things that we do, Chair. So that's the improvement groups. And I say, because it's in the Chief Executive report, I'm not asking for approval, this is just merely to let you know where we've got to in the system. We will have these up and running by the beginning of April. So that is the intention, at the beginning of April, in line with our planning cycle, these things will be up and running. We do have work to now pull together the chairs and the individual terms of reference. I think we have an interesting discussion to have about how collaborative molds into that improvement group. So there's work to be done, So that's the structure change. The second element of my report then is about our organisational structures. As the board will be very well aware, we are in a 4-phase approach at the moment to changing structure within the ICB as an organisation. The first phase and the second phase are now completed, and we are moving into the third phase, which is consultation with affected staff and the organisation as a whole to our structures. So we met yesterday with all staff. A lot of HR assessment work has gone on to identify the impact of our structural change. A lot of people are not affected by the structural change yet. A lot of people will remain in the same job. However, we do have a number of people who are affected by the change. They are all individually aware of that change, and they will end up in a position of being either in a competitive slot in, they might be in a ring fence, they might be at risk. We're working through that. And say we're consulting with them at an organisation at an individual level until the 8th of March. After the 8th of March, we would then hopefully be able to start to make those changes, because part of our change has been a considerable reduction in fixed term posts, and also because we have held a large number of vacancies. We have not gone out with a voluntary redundancy process, because we believe the organisational change for this phase we can manage through holding the posts and obviously then the reallocation of jobs in different areas. There will still be people very much affected, but we are hoping to avoid any form of compulsory redundancy through this process. Okay. And obviously at the end of that chair, we're in phase 4, and I'll bring that back to the board. Winter headlines, I'm actually not going to go into any great details in the document, but obviously Lisa's going to talk us through reviewing in terms of what has happened with regards to winter. What I do need to put on record is the absolutely amazing work that has been done in the system to deal with what has been a truly horrific winter, both in terms of demand, industrial action, and just the level of infection actually in the community and in our hospitals. And I think it's important to have on record in the Chief Executive's report how amazing people have been across us, and it should be noted. What I would say is December was truly extraordinary, both as individuals and numerically. When you look at the numbers, it's quite extraordinary. January has been a different kind of month, which has actually found ourselves into a slightly different place in terms of ambulance turnaround. It is, in many cases, a very positive position. We have increased dramatically the capacity in our community, and again, I'm sure Lisa will talk to that as part of her report. So it has felt slightly different in January, in fact, very different in January compared to how it felt in December. I think what is important is a lot of what we've done over the winter chair has been short-term solution to short-term problem. Our challenge now is devising the long-term solutions to make sure we get this right. So we've done great stuff because we've had to. We've now got to build a new world, which is not the same, which is doing more of what we did over the last one. And the final bit is our approach to planning. So as board members will be aware, we've got the 1-year plan to deal with, and obviously we've got the 5-year forward plan. I think it's important that I just wanted to raise, we've done this in a very engaged manner. We've had a number of planning days where people across the system have been involved in planning, and we are on target to deliver a plan in line with the NHS. So happy to take any thoughts, comments or questions.
I'm Shane, there's a lot in there. Any comments, observations, questions? Alison?
Well, what you're saying, Shane, about people across the system working hard, and I'd just like to support that. Sitting here, you can imagine what it's like day to day in practice and how it can amazing people in substandard, suboptimal conditions. So I really support that. Just in terms of the improvement groups, just a couple of questions. One is, for them to work the way you want them to work, it sounds like it's around sustainable transformation. Do you have the capacity, because there's a lot of transformation resource around the systems, is that now coming into play in these improvement groups? So how does that work? And just in terms of your, you said that when things might go off track, an improvement cell will be created to help it get back on track. Just the cultural approach that you want these groups to take, and how it feels when you're on receipt of support from the cell that's being set up.
And the one thing that worries you, if we need anything else, what will stop this working? What do we need to be mindful of that will stop this working in the way that you think will form the best output? What is it that worries you that we need to know about?
In terms of the resource, we have, as part of our reorganisation, looked at creating the Transformation Directorate within the ICB. It is not the size that you would love it to be, I would love it to be, but it is a beginning point where we've got resources, both mental health and acute and unscheduled, etc. So that there is a resource within the ICB, because there was a resource in the CCG. I do think when we establish these groups, we will be looking to our partner organisations in the way that we look at them in terms of finance, in terms of people, in terms of strategy. Our partner organisations become part of that wider improvement architecture. Okay? But if we're starting with, we've created a team within the ICB. In terms of the improvement cell concept, so within Lisa's world, what we're creating is what we call the service delivery unit. Okay? And the job of the service delivery unit is there to support through performance improvement when things aren't quite on track. Okay? And I really must stress, because it's a cultural question, this is not performance management as the NHS would have known it. This is about how can we help, how can we make this work, as opposed to here's what you must do. So what we're trying to create with the service delivery unit is we would have a mental health team, we would have a children's team, we would have an unscheduled team, an elective team, and an acute team. And it's there to support our partners to improve. It is not there to performance manage our partners. It really isn't. That's not what the ICB is about. It's about how do we drive that around. So that's the service delivery unit concept. So you've got 4 improvement groups which are driving big scale transformation, but every day performance may be difficult. So for example, elective care. So you would then see the likes of where Caroline, for example, would work with you, Maria, in terms of producing information and support. So that's what the ICB's got to be there to do. It's got to be there to provide support to improve performance, not performance manage a banging table, because that isn't what we're here to do anymore. And that's the cultural element of the whole thing. And that's, I mean, I'm briefly joking, as Dave heard me say it earlier, partnership's blooming hard, isn't it? And actually that's what we're coming to here, because we're trying to create a partnership environment. These are partnership improvement groups, and the SDU is a partner to help improvement. That's a cultural shift, I would argue, that the NHS really hasn't been particularly great at. So that I couldn't overestimate to you, Alison, how hard I think this will be, mindset-wise, for us in the ICB and also I think for partners, to appreciate we're moving into a different place. It's exciting, challenging, but I have to say, daunting as well.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Lisa, Jaya, and Dave.
Can I just respond in terms of Alison? Partly culturally is also, it's the systems operational plan. So if we fail to deliver the 78-week number, just because one partner's been unable to, actually it's about how those improvement cells actually then work out, so how do we do it? So what's the kind of remedial support we either need to put in terms of then delivering that target? So I think it's both and, both in terms of performance improvement, but also saying, okay, so we always knew we were going with the risk, so how do we mitigate collectively, as opposed to mitigating potentially at someone else's expense? So I think it's that journey that we need to take through in terms of those improvement cells.
Lisa, Jaya?
With the improvement groups, very excited about it, but also realise that I doubt there'll be any that will not involve workforce. Am I right? Because we need, So I'm just thinking about in terms of reporting and how we make sure that we get the information that we need, but not create additional, lots and lots of meetings all over the place. Will there be a read across these groups so that we can streamline reporting, hear what we need to hear, but not add to the pressures? Because I know the partnership working with partners without that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a question of executive leaders, so the executive group of chief executives, I think, need to play in that space. So actually we're really systems managers, systems leaders, and ultimately we shouldn't be bringing everything to a committee, because that actually just chokes the whole system.
Yeah.
So it's only goes to the committee when it actually has to. Otherwise, we're just getting on with delivery. So that for me is the system chief executives play that role, system executive group plays that role, as we articulated the decision-making framework paper that we got through in October. Because you did right. If we don't have that, everything just comes to committee and the whole system just falls over.
Dave?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And again, just to add my thanks to those of Shane for the great work that our social work teams and health and clinical teams did over the winter period to make the difference that they did do, and equally to recognise that's not sustainable into the long term, and we need to make the changes that we need to make into the medium and long term. I guess just putting together the discussion we've had about the improvement groups and the fantastic presentation that we had earlier about locality partnerships, and recognising that much of the improvement work that we do ultimately will have to be landed in local places through localities, I expect. And recognising the complexity, as we've heard, of the locality partnership groups on the one hand wanting to do the system change at a standard level, but equally wanting to have that innovative, thriving cultural atmosphere being able to drive from the bottom up change as well. What's your thinking around about how we'll start to develop the linkages between the improvement groups and the locality partnerships as well?
My initial thinking is it's through the Improving Lives in the Community improvement group. So it could be children, it could be mental health, but if you start with the 6 localities, because they operationally report through to Dave as the operational director for primary and twin care. So if you start with the fact that they are connected to the Improving Lives in the Community, that's a beginning point to give them that line of sight between the executive leaders and the locality. I think over time we've got more mature. There might be projects that actually happen in any one of them, but they're going to start because they operationally report today in the Improving Lives in the Community.
Thank you. Dave, any other questions or comments for Shane? Okay, thanks very much. I'll move us on then to winter planning. Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. So I would just remind colleagues we're only still in February, so I feel like we're still in winter. So Shane's enthusiasm in terms of feeling better in January. We are just in February and it's still feeling quite pressured. But if I can just give some highlights in terms of how significantly challenged December was. So across our UEC pathway, we had ambulance response times in terms of category 2 call of 169 minutes. That's against a standard of 18. We have 999 call answering of 128 seconds against a standard of 5. We had over 2,000 patients who waited in ED over 12 hours. At points during December, we had 87 escalation beds open at MBT above the core bed base, and in the BRI we have 59 again over the bed base. And in our community we have over 200 additional beds in place that we hadn't planned for and had predicted through that. So just wanted to give the scale to the board just in terms of the challenge that we faced and the response in terms of that challenge we worked through. We have had since published the delivery plan for recovering urgent and emergency care services, which was published on Monday. And that presents us with a roadmap in terms of how we start to respond and actually embed some practices working through. So just in terms of reminding the board, we have had 3 tranches of funding that have come down as part of our winter planning process this year. So we had 14.2 million, which was our board assurance, which formed part of our demand capacity response, and we monitor that through our board assurance framework. We then had the adult social care grant, which we received 11.5 million, and that in the December board I asked for delegated approval in terms of taking that through. And subsequently, in the beginning of January, we received an additional 200 million, which is a drawdown fund. It isn't an allocation directly to it, but we have a targeted amount. And we've kind of used those 3 pots of money quite differently. So particularly in terms of, if I think about the 14.2, we set in train our core ambition to try and achieve an additional 500 beds going into the winter. And as you'll see from the table in the slides, we haven't achieved that, but we have made significant progress. So we plan to open level 6 beds in MBT from the beginning of December. We were unable to do that because of building work. But actually, in opening those additional beds, it has allowed the bed flow in MBT to be affected in a different way. So really working in terms of making sure those beds are available at a point in time in the week, normally a Sunday into a Monday, that allows us to get different flow coming through in terms of the MAU. We've increased our virtual ward capacity as planned and as intended. What's going out now for us is, whilst we've been working through in terms of our virtual ward capacity, we routinely have virtual ward capacity available on a daily basis that we're not able to discharge or prevent admissions into. So we need to work out now how we optimise our virtual ward capacity before we move on to the next phase of expansion. So we've made the steps in progress and part of how we work this through, but we do need to make sure that we're really clear in terms of how we culturally change that pathway for our clinicians to make people feel safe in discharging to there, and making sure we have that as part of our admission avoidance pathway. We've also done things like expand our same-day emergency care at our front doors in terms of the BRI and at MBT, and really making sure that it gives us the bedded basis that we wanted to in terms of making that difference. And again, that is part of the integral plans in terms of our delivering recovery for urgent emergency care services. We have made the changes around stroke in regard to the development of the community stroke team who are in place and have wrapped around Western, North Bristol Trust and the BRI. So we have made progress against that 14.2 million. The expectation based on the document that was published this week is some of that money will be recurrently available to us. So we have the opportunity to then think about how we embed that and actually work through that as part of a systematic response to building our capacity as we move forward. If I can move on to the next 3 slides, and I deliberately showed this specification by the different local authority areas around the adult social care discharge grant. We've spent a lot of time working with our care sector providers to understand how we work with them to support patients being discharged, both in a timely way, both from hospital but also from our community settings. So we've done things like we've made available inflationary uplifts in January as opposed to in April to make sure that those individuals can be supported, they can receive a pay award earlier in the year. We've provided teams that are working, and I think we're piloting it particularly in MBT with 2 of our larger care sector providers who are working into the hospital to actually see how they can accelerate a discharge. We've really changed our focus in terms of discharge, so every single bed matters, and it's almost every single hour of every single bed matters, to try and make sure that even if it's bringing someone home a day earlier or back to the residential setting a day earlier, we work through that. And that was one of the things that happened particularly over New Year's Eve and that New Year bank holiday weekend. We had care home providers who came in over the bank holiday to actually assess patients and discharge patients into a care setting to free those beds up. It felt very much what we're trying to do as part of this piece of work is to build that sense of team and a sense of trusted team within those pieces of work. We've also put in place additional social workers going back into hospitals, making sure that they're part of the team on the ward. We haven't got it right yet, and there's a lot of cultural work that we need to do in terms of those arrangements, but we do need to start to build that through. And then if I can just talk about the final tranche of money, we're really using this as a way of almost addressing, as a waiting list initiative. We don't normally talk about that in terms of discharges, but really thinking about, we know we have a substantial number of patients who, in NHS terminology, have no criteria to resign. There are a range of reasons why we have patients who sit either in our acute beds or in our community setting or in our social care teams with effectively no criteria to resign. So we're working through some of the issues that sit around that. So we have purchased additional spot beds, which sit against my 200. We're also bringing in additional agency social workers and occupational therapists to wrap around those staff. We know we have patients who are waiting for Care Act assessment. That isn't because our social work teams aren't working incredibly hard to do that, but the actual sheer scale of numbers of people, both coming through the community front door, but also waiting for discharge isn't there. So we're bringing that in to bring that additional capacity and additional agency occupational therapy to work that through. We have been working with our nursing home, particularly nursing homes from a very NHS perspective, in order to find the additional capacity, so we're having an ongoing dialogue with them. And we're also working at how, building on the theory of the virtual ward, how do we actually get virtual teams to support people in those homes, as opposed to thinking we need to have a wraparound team. In our own absolute view about our daily capacity and that every bed matters, we've been running daily capacity calls, so we've been stepping in as a system to say how do we unblock something, how do we make sure that we can use every bed for discharge, can we do something in terms of, we've had issues in terms of particular types of medication being prescribed and extra care housing saying no. So we then said, okay, so how do we unblock that? What do we do next? How do we make sure that every single bed, every single day matters? I know that sounds really trite in a way, but that's our bit in terms of just making sure we work that through. We are working really hard because by the nature of how the funding has come through, to really make sure we're managing and supporting the market to deliver the care that we need. We know that we're going to have an issue as we work through, as we go through the financial regimes into the next year. We have local authorities who pay a particular rate to nursing homes because it's a long-term placement and it's a particular rate that works through. Our CHC teams, because of the complexity of the individuals, pay a slightly different rate. So we're trying to make sure that we can have a reflective rate with our care sector that reflects the turnover of patient, how long a patient will stay in there, but also reflective of the cost of their staff that they're working through. We've also worked in terms of identifying additional domiciliary care providers. These are our domiciliary care providers who normally work outside the block arrangements that local authorities have. And we're working about how we use those to effectively support this waiting list initiative in terms of clearing our discharges. We know that the only way we're going to get flow is by making sure we have flow in every single part of our sector. And what's been really, really clear throughout January is when we've had 111 being able to answer the phone within the service standards of 60 seconds and get to a call advisor, when we've had 999 answering within 5 seconds in terms of the call answering, and our category 2 within 18 minutes, and people being able to go into ED and being seen broadly within 4 hours, and being then admitted up to flow. You can see how our urgent care system can flow. You can see how we're getting that improvement for our population. So that is our trigger, trying to actually get ourselves to a place by the end of, it will be the end of April when the 200 million additional funding will cease. We can then start to put in place some of the recurrent blocks for next year as part of the planning round using the additional allocation. It will be a journey for us though, because we have a significant number of beds over our plan, but we also need to have a transition path in order to do that without destabilising any part of the system, but also support us in using that money in the right way. We have an absolute system commitment to use our out-of-hospital community into using home first as opposed to bed capacity, but we will need to make that transition as we work through 23-24. Shall I stop there and then I'll move on to industrial action?
Okay, thanks Lisa. So a lot in there. Any questions or observations for Lisa on what she presented? So we've given lots of detail in the presentation. Are there any points around winter planning that anyone wants to raise? Helen?
Yeah, I'm going to raise it because I was probably going to say sort of pick up certain points from Lisa in my update. Thanks for that, Lisa. I think everyone can just see the scale of work going on, and I also sort of applaud system partners for that working together over the Christmas period. I suppose my question is how this is maintained. How is it feeling right now, Lisa? We're now sort of, I don't know where are we, beginning of February. Are we still making those gains that we saw early January? And my question to partners, sort of Maria, Eugene, Dave, how is it feeling? And also Julie, how is it feeling out there? What are the challenges in making this work longer term?
So if I can answer first for bringing partners. Today feels better, but it only feels better in certain parts of our system. And I think that's the challenge we need to work through, is to make sure that every single part of our system is feeling less pressurised on a daily basis. And therefore, as a system, we're working to make sure we get to that point. Recognising the additional challenge we have within the community in regard to not being able to see every patient that the district nursing team would want to on the day they need to. There's things like that are happening that we are doing as part of our custom practice now, but we need to decompress. So we remain as a system an open form, because when we set our exit criteria, we set them across every metric in the system. We didn't look just at our annual response times or our ED response, because we recognised if in order to get flow, we would need to have it across our system. But I'll let other colleagues respond.
So I would absolutely recognise a huge amount of work going in, but this is a very long-term intractable problem we're trying to break here. So I think we're still seeing, and this work is surfacing a lot, which is great. Multiple processes, multiple practices, still some variation in risk tolerance inside and outside of hospital, which is a really big piece of work for us to do together in a trusting way around pathways. I think there is still perhaps more work to do on transparency. So on any one given day, we know exactly what's happening, what's available out there, which patients can go into it. Sometimes it's not just a matter of numbers for me to say to Dave over in South Gloss, I've got these patients who could go somewhere. There is always the correct fit of services to match that actual cohort. So mere numbers don't always describe the situation. We had a very good day, didn't we, Dave, going through our list together. On paper, we were both going, why isn't this working perfectly? Really good reasons, because actually capacity wasn't quite what demand needed at that time. But I do think we're moving forward. I think a lot of work has gone on, but it is really hard work, and it is on top of things. But I think we are getting in a much better place than a couple of months ago.
I mean, I would agree. Things are feeling better in February now than they did in December. I guess it's the work that we now need to do is how we sustain some of these changes, because the sustainability is still what's leading us. And in some cases, not everything that we did to make a difference was heroic. So how do we make sure that just becomes what we do? And it's also flushed out that some of our systems aren't as easy as they can be to get things happening quickly. And now is the time that we have to fix them. But we're working through a really interesting time, because we move on from the challenge of demand. There's something else that we're focusing on, issues around industrial relations or whatever else. So it almost is moving on to the next issue that we need to focus on, as opposed to getting a break from the pressure of demand coming through or people needing services.
I guess, Chair, just to add from our perspective, support the comments that have been made and the good work that has been happening across the system. Of course, what we do know is that we've been using short-term bedded capacity, which isn't a long-term solution to the future, as I referenced earlier, and some of the critical issues that we've discussed previously around workforce and workforce challenges and how we use that more effectively. It's a systemic issue that's going to take time to change and move forward. I guess from a social care perspective, of course, some of the pressures that we see come after the tail end of some of the pressures within the acute system, and if we have got people staying in the acute system or in the community system more widely in a bed capacity when they don't need to be there, that leads to increased deconditioning, which leads to increased pressures on social care, which means they're having to have support for longer. So there's a sort of circle in this that we need to break the whole position, and therefore lead to long-term recovery for individuals in the best way possible for them and their health and care. I think we've got the proposals on the table now. We're having the conversations. We've just got to push forward and deliver on them.
Thanks, Anna. Julie, Dominic, I think, John or Ruth?
Not to repeat echo that, I think the two bits. I think the one about process, I think we've really highlighted that actually we shoot ourselves in the foot sometimes, and some of our processes could be improved. The other bit, I think, over the next couple of months, sort of relates to Dave's point. We now have to think how we get out of some of those short-term measures. And there's a real danger we're going to go, we're going to peak again, because they were short-term, and as they start to come to an end, actually, will we be ready? Because it is a much longer game. So I'm really pleased with the progress we've made, but I'm still worried about the next couple of months in terms of as we extract ourselves from some of those, making sure we've got capacity to deal with them.
Yeah. How are you making sure when we're cycling that show?
Absolutely coordinated releases
just, it's that bit cautious optimism, I suppose, in terms of certainly the next couple of months.
Okay. And AWP?
Mental health is subtly different. So in terms of our demand patterns, they're not seasonal in the same way that the viruses and so on are. If anything, they're counter-cyclical, so we get more crisis presentations in the northern and cold. But obviously the operational resilience issues around sickness activity, pandemic, industrial action, that sort of thing, that does affect us. We saw a rise in those both outbreaks on wards and staff off before Christmas, and then it's tailed off through January. And so we're dealing with the kind of the ever rising tide of mental health presentations, but it's not a first surge in the same way.
Thanks, Dominic. And primary care?
I think it's still feeling very hard, very pressured, and even in those areas, I'm sure this is true across the board, where it might be briefly feeling slightly better, it's only better until someone goes sick the next day. So I think it's sort of still feels very much on a knife edge. I do think that there is an opportunity now, as Lisa was saying, to start to look at some of the home first admission avoidance opportunities in a more joined up way than we have been able to over the past couple of months because of the pressures coming down from NHSE and because of the way the money was coming. But in terms of sustainability, if we're really building some of our community, I think community in the broader sense, into our plans and our thinking, I think there's an opportunity to be doing that. And now is the time.
And are you engaged in those conversations?
We are. Yeah, no, absolutely, we're on it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I think there's a really important aspect of continuing to build on the positive things that have come out of the acute pressures recently. There's been significantly improved communication between GP practices and community pharmacists, for example, and in the handover interface between in-house and out-of-house primary care. So there have been a lot of things that are achieved in the sort of face of the emergency to try and meet the increase in expectation. You know, having a workforce that's equally been afflicted by infection as much as our patients has been a challenge, you know, for all of us. But it has resulted in some different ways of working, which were emergency interventions. But I think we can build on those moving forward to keep them sustained, because they make a massive difference to being able to respond.
Okay, thanks, John. Lisa, a really detailed explanation of what appears to be a really good grip as well. Do you want to take us on to industrial action next steps?
Just before I do, it would be really helpful, and obviously as I'm sitting next to the chief people officer, I'm taking the opportunity. I think we do need to be really clear about how we manage the workforce growth and anticipated growth that's coming through the recovery plan for urgent and emergency care, and how we then link that through in terms of our social care, because we know we need to grow our workforce, but we also recognise we can't pull it from each other. So how do we really work with our communities to do that? And I think it would be really important for us to be able to do that together.
Okay.
I can't lose sight of this yet. So if I may move on to industrial action, and then I'll hand over to Rosie, because we would quite like to raise just in terms of some of the harm. So we've worked in terms of planning for industrial action, and it wouldn't be right for me to talk about winter without the industrial action that we've been working through across December and January. So we've worked as a system planning for the industrial action, and also through our system critical incident that went into New Year. Every single organisation has had detailed plans, and we've summarised them together and made sure that we've got real clarity in terms of where an organisation's action may have another adverse action on another organisation, to make sure we have that clarity in those arrangements. We've made sure we've had debrief sessions after each industrial action, and part of that has been, one, collectively understanding where we may have had pressures. So in the first RCN action, there were issues around coverage on lates in hospitals. We've had other issues in terms of making sure that we've got the right derogations in place for certain areas. So we've gone through those debrief sessions as a system to make sure we build it into our learning process, make sure it's been built in to the next industrial action. We've also having collective monthly debriefs where we take all the industrial actions in turn together, because each organisation is in fact impacted in a different way, to make sure we've got clear areas in terms of working that through. And going back to the point we just talked about in terms of process through our systems, it's also helped us really both highlight where we have processes that are either unhelpful or get in the way. And so we've been able to say, actually, now in business as usual, we're no longer following that. We have obviously made sure that we are taking learning from industrial action and building it into that business as usual process. So some of that's been around things, how we use our patient transport services. You know, we've been using them in a very traditional way. Actually, coming out of the industrial action, there's much more flexibility that we can use in terms of doing that. We will continue to do that as we work through each phase of industrial action and each week that will be having industrial action in terms of taking that through. And just to reassure the board, operationally we've managed this very, very well. It's been really well managed by every single organisation. We've had different challenges through each day. But we did want to flag, and I'll hand over to Rosie at this point, about how there is a potential for harm.
So just to reiterate what Lisa said, I think the system response to managing industrial action has been fabulous, and the on-the-day management has worked really, really effectively. But I just think it's worth us being mindful of the longer term impact that we might see, because for every single day we have industrial action, we have to change the way that we do our work and how our teams are working and to keep things safe on the day. That necessarily means we are having to suspend or stop some elements of some planned work, and that will inevitably then have a knock-on impact on our waiting and treatment delays. So it's just a flag the board that we will have to be really mindful going forward of how we observe the impact of that and how we observe what and if impacts we might be having on our population on a longer term basis. So just for flagging that for now, we'll need to do it through our normal safety processes such as our harm reviews, etc., and observe that and make sure we mitigate as best as we can. But it is an observation for each day of industrial action without having to change the way that we work. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that, but
well, I would absolutely agree with you, and being mindful that it's not just your traditional, as we might think, clinical professions, RCN or ambulance. We're also looking at train strikes, which stop people coming in for outpatient appointments and staff going in, teacher strikes where people are having to remain at home. So there are a number of impacts, and I think as things go on, and with some of them planned with a synergy going on each day, we could be very significantly impacted. Sometimes human behaviour changes on strike days and we have fewer people coming in. But then, of course, the next couple of days after that, we see a huge surge, which perhaps we haven't then planned for in the same way. So that, of course, will cause crowding and potential harm within it. So I think we just have to be very mindful there are impacts that sit alongside this.
So I may be asking a very obvious question, but are we scenario planning around that? So if all of a sudden we get something that is grows and, you know, it meant 50 people or 500 people or 5,000 people.
so in terms of changes in our capacity, these sort of people are watching everything that's just around. So if we are delaying any treatments, and those are being logged and that's being logged back in, and the trusts are working to get patients back in as soon as possible after to reschedule their treatment. Our own patient safety processes will carry on monitoring if we're seeing a change in harm, and we certainly talked this to a committee last week, didn't we? We'll work with our public health colleagues as well to see if anything else shows up. So I think it's an observational piece. I'm just flagging it so we're mindful, and I will keep working with my trust chief nurses as well, so we can make sure we're triangulating.
Okay, thanks, Rosie. Steve?
Just to add, really, from a university perspective, because you've got large numbers of students who are supernumerary under supervision in clinical settings, one of the things that we're tracking and monitoring is just making sure that there aren't any risks on the student side or delays due to students not being able to satisfy requirements for graduation and then PIN numbers. So there's sort of like a long-term piece in here, which is what we don't want to do, is disrupt the flow. But we've got to be mindful, both in social work and in the health settings, the supernumerary and need to be supervised and mentored. If we start to see delay, then that has a knock-on consequence if we can't register them ultimately. So we're scenario planning that.
So we might do that for the system policy is that invite some other partners in to talk about a kind of exploratory piece on how we would pull that together. Observing in the round big things going on, I think that.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of standard practice for major incident management, critical incident management, that we talk about different scenarios and how we might, and what we might do to mitigate them, or not, as the case may be, because we might have to just decide we can't, but at least then we've made those decisions as a board, and we don't leave that to individuals to have to make those decisions. It gives a bit of support and governance over it.
We have had those explicit conversations in our executive and the SPG.
Yeah.
To just test how far we've gone with our thresholds and whether we need to pull back again. So we think that piece will work.
Okay, good. Any other comments?
Just a brief one. I just thought it would be helpful to dwell briefly on what this feels like for staff, for colleagues, and I can obviously only speak for my own organisation, but to me it's kind of in two parts. So I visited the picket lines when our nurses were out earlier this month, and a wonderful, joyful celebration of the strike. At the same time, people absolutely recognising that they hadn't come to that decision lightly, and they were very angry and wanted their voices to be heard. To flip it to the other side, for every person who was out on strike for us, there were 10 working on the wards wearing a badge saying, I support the strike and I'm choosing to work. And I think that's really important, the commitment of individuals to the service, to the NHS, to hopefully to our trust and our wards and our patients and our teams as well. But it's just, this is really real for the people affected by it. And we can of course talk about the operational planning and resilience of that, but we mustn't forget the human element to it.
Points well made, thank you, Dominic. Any other comments on industrial action? No, okay. Anything else on next steps at all?
No, I think I've covered those, but obviously we'll continue to keep the board briefed, both through the interview process, but also the industrial action as we progress through the months.
Okay, thanks Lisa. Next on the agenda we've got the committee updates. We may have covered a fair bit of this in the conversations we've had, particularly around winter planning. But can I come to yourself first of all, Ellen, and then maybe to Rosie and Lisa if they've got anything else to add on it. But so if you can just talk to the board around outcomes, performance and quality, and then I'll go through the committee team too.
Okay, thanks Jeff. So we've covered with performance, and I'm not going to go into detail on that, even though I think I've already made my comments there. Jeff, you did talk about what a critical incident means at the committee, and I think you laid the challenge down for the executive to come back, so that's coming back to committee on understanding what would lead us into a critical incident, what it means when we're in a critical incident and how we de-escalate. So that's coming back to committee and should possibly come back to board over the next few months. We talked virtual wards. With the aim within BNSSG of increasing from 90 up to 450 by September, significant increase. Committee is keen to understand the impact of what that 450 will be on the system. I don't think we have the answers yet, but that's coming back to the committee. But it's something that I think we're taking keen interest in, understanding what the milestones are in getting to that 450 position, and whether 450 is the highest we can get to, or whether there's opportunity for more. I also attended the Health and Care Professional Exec Committee with Rosie, where I felt I was very impressed with the committee. I think the partnerships, the local partnerships have quite a strong voice in that, and they talked with passion about the work they put in to get the virtual wards up and running. So really keen to understand and to watch that journey. We also talked about industrial action, we've covered that. A couple of points. Jeff, you asked me to look at 3 areas, something to inform, which I think I've gone through. Any areas for challenge. I have a couple of challenges for the executive teams. I think for outcomes, performance and quality committee to be really effective, there's 2 things that we really need. One, I think we talked about earlier on, which is the operational plan. That I think last year I think there was still iteration because we were new. up until sort of August time. I think it's really important to have it signed in place by April 1st would be my ideal, that it is stretching but achievable, so that we in the committee can then actually sort of work to that operational plan. The second thing that I am asking for, which I think I've asked for consistently throughout, is a really clear, concise set of performance reporting, which is consistent across all committees. I really welcome the reduction in targets from 350 or 300 down to 35, even though I know we'll have more than that because we are system-wide. But I really welcome that, and it would be quite good if we have set performance reports that we could actually get our heads around and allow us to focus on the really critical items. So that's a real big thing.
Yeah, I think that was something you discussed at the Quality Committee, to make sure we've got a report that cuts across all our committees, so it's finance, people, performance, it's in one place. So we haven't got 5 committees looking at 5 different reports and all making different decisions. So that you are looking at the same data, and then you're able to deliver against the plan based on that data. You know, Shane, I think that's one that is quite important for us. You'd see it in a trust, wouldn't you? So UHBW, AWP or NBT, you would have a plan that contained all of that in one place. You wouldn't have separate performance reports. So it is achievable.
Yeah. And I just think it just allows us to focus sort of more than we possibly currently do. Because as the year goes on, the picture gets more and more complicated. You know, every time there's another set of funding, there's another set of targets. So I think just having a clear set would be really, really helpful. And the only other area we looked at was the strategy session, which Colin has gone through today. Couple of challenges from the committee members. One was on timing, the feeling that we need something before December, which I think came from Hugh from local authority, and also that locality partnerships need to be highlighted more and more focus from them. So that's my...
Yeah, and there was 3 things I've asked chairs of committees to look at, and Ellen's gone through that there. What is needed to inform the ICB, what's needed to challenge us, and then the final one is there anything that needs to be escalated from the committee to the board? Okay. Any questions, Alan, before I go to Rosie and Lisa? Okay. Rosie, anything to add? Okay, great. Lisa, anything more?
I just wanted to highlight some positive progress that we've managed to make on our elective waiting times. So just to highlight to the board that our total waiting list has dropped to 80,290 in December. That's from 87,481 in November. Our 52-week waiters has dropped to 4,761 from 5,386. Our 78-week waiters have dropped to 552. I know these are still incredibly high numbers, but where we started this year on, that's significant progress through. And our number of 104-week waiters has dropped to 60. Obviously, we're still working to achieve the 78-week and the 104-week status by the 31st of March.
How well, I mean, I see that, but how well circulated is that data? I mean, are you getting that routinely, Ellen? Do you need to? I mean, it's very NHS-centric.
It is very NHS-centric,
but it's still, you know, still what we're held to account on.
We do get it, and it's something that sort of we look at in detail together with the cancer numbers on breast cancer, which has really improved recently.
Because what that report gives us is regional comparisons as well as national comparisons.
We've got a really good benchmarking report that sort of is my go-to document really, that shows how we are performing against South West and how we're moving. And I have to say, in the last couple of months, there's a lot more green than there was previously. So I think there's definitely some movement, and I'm holding my breath, Lisa, that that's continuing.
And it shows the entire work across the system, because we know, particularly where we've had both the urgent care pressures, but also with the industrial action, that ability to really make sure we see those patients is really important.
So for me, thanks to Lisa for the work that's gone in there, and for Rosie and the rest of the team.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Alison.
I just wanted to say brilliant news about the breast waiting times, because they've been, despite brilliant work, they've been a challenge for a while, and to
see that increase must make the teams feel a lot better as well as obviously the certification. So hopefully it's sustainable, but it's a massive improvement. So to say well done.
Yeah, and then I think a lot of work on MBT there, Maria, isn't there? Particularly, so and it's a sizable change in performance.
Yeah.
So and that's better service to our patients. So brilliant, yes, really good stuff. Anything else around quality and performance? Going to the song. Jaya.
Right. So the committee for the ICB, Shane's already covered what's happening with the restructure and things like settling down from April onwards. We of course also have Joe Hicks, who's observing, who's our new chief officer. So we're all set to be able to take on the workforce challenges for our 550,000. Obviously, with the uncertainty until April when everything's still structured, we've still got staff feeling it, and we will keep close track of the survey. We have that report privately, and I understand that it will be published in March, so we'll keep a close track of that and make sure that the ICB is doing forming what it should. For the ICS, obviously most of the projects go through the People Programme Board, and as I understand it, as those reported to us, much of the effort has been for in preparation for the strikes at Christmas and ongoing. Eugene, I didn't know if you wanted to comment on what's happening with the Programme Board and the refocusing prioritisation and the signing off of the reference and
Sure. So one of the things that we found is there were quite a number of different work streams at play, and it was quite hard to be able to see what progress we're making. So led by the data, we have decided to prioritise nursing as a profession in terms of how we really focus in on the attraction, retention, and experience around nursing, because if we are going to have a fighting chance to reduce our use of agency in the new year, and also to make sure that we have a proof of concept in terms of how we can really focus in and improve our performance on a particular workforce group, we start there. So it's not to say all the other groups aren't important, they equally are, but we need to start somewhere and make it work, because at the moment there's a lot of effort and activity, but not much traction in terms of where the problems are. So we will be using this and reporting, and using the improvement methodology, inch-wide, mile-deep, and then seeing how we can do that in a sprint way for the other professions across the ICS.
Thank you, Eugene. The other thing that has happened is that we now have a deputy director of comms engagement in place. So we'll be having a meeting, or I'll be having a meeting with them in due course. You can't have a system unless you're communicating with them, and you can evidence them in communicating two-way. So this is quite a big thing for us to be able to get going and get a handle on. So there's that, and also once we've got communications going, we are going to be considering BCSC membership of our board and how we can work that into strategy. So Colin, I'll be coming to you, given that that's a new job title and it's all about partnerships and strategy and how we make sure we have engagement at the right level and some ideas. But I think we can start to grow our board now that we've got a few things in place.
Just on that point of communication, in my conversation with your chairs, I haven't offered up that they can voluntarily send NEDs to any committees. Some of you are sending quite a lot of NEDs to the different committees, others aren't at all. What I've articulated to your chairs is there's some value in you sending a NED to a committee. One is they hear what's being discussed. Two, they get a better understanding of system working. And three, they're able to come back and create the challenges within your own organisation as to whether that be a committee or a board about system working. But the point I made and agreed with chairs is it has to be for them to decide how they allocate their next time, whether that be internally, whether it be externally. That's their call. The two things that we will do to make sure that your non-exec directors are engaged. The one is I had a consultation with Shane around a system update, because what the chairs have said to me is the only update they get on the system is the conversation with you as the chief execs, which is not enough. Now, they do go to the Integrated Care Partnership, and they do have a chairs reference group with me, but we will do a briefing, a system briefing on a one page that your non-exec team, particularly your chairs, can see. And then we will run net awareness sessions like we did last year, at least one a year, probably two. And I'll put those in place in the next few weeks and months. And then there's a chance there, rather than people having to go to committees all the time, they can just turn up at those awareness sessions, and we'll give them some broader themes about what's happening within the Integrated Care Board and that partnership as a whole. But you know, I mean, within our committees, we've got a real variance of what's happening with partners, non-executive directors attending. And some find it value, some don't. But you know, that's a personal choice on it.
I have to say the NEDs that come to our house always add value. So I would welcome any that we want to come to the committee, given that it is a huge challenge, and it would be lovely to be working across
And the People Committee is different in that there's an internal focus with the 400 odd staff that are in the ICB, and then there's an external focus, and they're two different meetings in effect, aren't they? So, okay. Jaya, anything else?
I think that's it.
Any other questions for Jaya? Okay, great. Thanks very much. Steve.
Thanks, Chair. So this is Finance, Estates and Digital, the Fed, as we call ourselves. We're getting into a good rhythm now in being able to explore and track our existing, current, but also thinking about the future, which is nice to see. And I have to say the reports, I think, are good. They're in your pack, so they're giving us a good level of detail. We've done some work to refine terms of reference, including membership. We do get good engagement from colleagues, non-execs from other organisations, which I think is helpful. We've been working, as you know, as a system to make sure that our finances land in the right way, and we are moving in the right direction. We are optimistic about our ability to deliver in year savings that are requiring efficiencies, and that's really important because it puts us in a good place for when we start in the next financial year. So good team working there, and a level of confidence, I think, that is improving as we get our glide paths right. I think that that's going to help us in the strategic planning going forward. It's really encouraging seeing system-wide planning now beginning to happen. So actually thinking about how we're going to drive our 4 pillars and make sure that we do have a focus on health inequalities and how we close gaps. And with the finances giving us the headroom to do some creative, innovative things, and that's what this is really about, I think. It would be useful sometimes to look at bigger pictures to make sure that we're not just focusing on the finance. The workforce piece is critical, and we know that that's an area that's shifting and changing. So how we get a read across, I think, for us, Jeff, is really important. Because what we should do against that plan is then understand what resource and effort do we need to put in, both in terms of our workforce, our physical estate, and our digital infrastructures and estate. And that's where this committee is now beginning to go. We've had a deep dive in terms of our digital, and we've recognised that actually the system needs good access to digital data. We need to democratise, in effect, the use of data. But we're also really clear that we need analytics and the ability, capacity, capability to look at the data and use it in effective ways. So there are some plans that are coming forward over the next month or so, which will hopefully provide us with an infrastructure to be able to do that. But there is a people piece in there which is critical. And I think next month we'll look at estates, deep dive on estates, and the capital investment that looks at our estate. And again, what we should do, what we must do, is look at our estate needs against a plan that we commit to in terms of delivery, and then work out where is the best way to spend any capital in our estates. But we've got to look at it system-wide rather than single organisations. And that means the conversations in the committee will need to prepare for, I guess, an evidence base that comes forward to the main board in terms of decisions that need to be taken. Because we've got a lot of backlog maintenance. We heard the pressures in terms of community from an earlier conversation, and we know that there are pressures in all the parts of our estate, but we've got to be thinking about the investment that best meets the future delivery for the system. And that's the challenge question for us. We know that there are cost pressures next year coming. We're factoring that in as we build our budgets, but nevertheless we are, as I think, in a slightly better, stronger position than last year. And the rest is actually embedded in that finance report. Yes, so.
But you made a good point there, Steve, around the change in conversations. You know, we wouldn't put a report through any of our boards without an equality assessment, which we legally have to do. The same is true now with the states, where that has to be has it had that system conversation before we take a decision. And we've, it might be a short conversation, but it might be a longer one depending on what it is. But it needs to happen. Good. Okay. Any questions for either Sarah or Steve? The report is there. The financial position doesn't look as bad as it has been.
We're confident we will deliver the financial plan for 22-23, and obviously we're just working through the 23-24. Inflation is going to be a challenge, but we're just working through the detail of that.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. Any questions for Steve or Sarah? Okay. Primary care now.
Sorry, I don't know whether it's probably linked my committee with yours actually, and I don't know whether it's Sarah or Steve. Back to the virtual ward discussion, and part of the health and care professional committee, they talked about challenges in the virtual ward, the IT not being joined up. I just wonder whether that's been in front of your committee at all.
That piece.
Ward
hasn't.
No, but that's something for us to we'll make sure
that it came up loud and clear from quite a number of the sort of committee, just to something to possibly consider.
I think there's a bigger piece on virtual.
Yeah.
I think there's three elements to get virtual wall to work. You have to have a workforce that can engage with whatever technologies you're putting in there. You have to have citizens, communities able also to engage in that new approach.
Yeah.
So there's a big development piece of work, I think. The technology piece, at one level, the technology piece is simple.
Yeah.
But getting it to work and using it effectively to mitigate risks and do all the things that we say we want to do, that's the big piece of work.
Which is interesting because the scale of the growth is quite sort of steep, isn't it? To get that right. Anyway.
Community skills as well is the other, it's just being able to manage it.
Who is leading that piece of work at the moment? Virtual wards.
Virtual wards. So there's two, in terms of clinical leads, you've got somebody from Serona and somebody from MBT, and we're actually just looking at business case to make sure we've got a single organisation, a single programme approach to it, because we've sort of got shared responsibilities at the moment.
And is there an ICB oversight for it? It just felt to me like quite an important sort of initiative, unless I've got that wrong.
Yeah, Rebecca's been overseeing it.
Okay.
It's Rebecca Dunn.
Okay.
And obviously with Becca going, that prompted the need to really think about where does that.
And she was quite an impressive individual actually.
Program leadership come from, so that's going through a process at the moment.
Alison.
Thanks very much, Chair. Primary Care Committee didn't meet in January. The last meeting, the moment in time, just two things to update the board on, which I've done before. One is the delegation of pharmacy, optometry and dentistry, still progressing. Huge amount of work going on behind the scenes, which comes to committee on a regular basis. So some of the assurance questions and challenges we've put in have become answered along the way, which is really helpful. I understand that a further checklist has been submitted this month actually through NHC on track as before. Very conscious of the risks to delegation. There are lots of opportunities, and we talked about those today, but there are some risks that come with it, which I've mentioned before. So just crystallising those risks so that all are aware, and in this list will be important from mitigations in place, but clearly some opportunities. Dave and I have talked about how when we look at the primary care committee, it will need to evolve. Certainly, we are getting information on pharmacy, optometry and dentistry now, but actually when we have that responsibility, it will look quite different and feel quite different. really pleased to say we have local representation, really good engagement from all of our local committees, local medical committee, pharmacy, optometry, and dentistry. So that's a really good starting point for what will be some exciting conversations and discussions and some challenges along the way. We know certainly a committee that dentistry is significantly challenged, and we've heard that from the locality team today. There are lots of opportunities for that, which I think they particularly as lead exec wants to grasp, but I think that and there's a massive transformation programme which NHS are leading at the moment, they will then be monitoring us leading from April, so we need to make sure there's progress on that. But we're working, there's clear evidence and assurance about working with NHS on a good level. Rachel Pearce has had one meeting with the 7 ICB chairs of primary care companies already. Got another one coming up in a couple of weeks' time, so I can probably report back more on that. So good progress. I think the risks are known. I don't think there's any unknowns at the moment, so I think that's a good thing. The other area we looked at was primary care strategy. It does feel very much like a point in time. It was a strategy developed in 2019. It is coming to the end of its cycle. There's a new national strategy coming. There's a GPCP strategy. There's the fuller uptake. There's the fuller report says there's lots of things that we need to. But the 4 key elements of the strategy we looked at were around quality and resilience of practices, workforce, infrastructure, and models of care. All will still remain relevant, but it's how that strategy is updated. So in terms of challenge, quite a lot of challenge has gone in on deliverables around the primary care strategy. I think it's developed really well, it is developing well, but I think what we have agreed as a committee is the visual representation of performance around practice. So something like a heat map of our patch for whatever you want the heat map to say. So it could be higher unscheduled attendances, it could be higher something else, lower something else. So you can look at really good practice, and you can also look at areas where you need to focus the funding that's coming in. So there is work the team are doing on doing that, and so we've got a really good at a glance picture of what's happening now on primary medical services, but obviously in the future it can handle all the other ones as well. So I expect that to come. Nothing to escalate from the committee. There is a clear focus on health inequality, and I think that came through earlier. I guess the question is the board cited enough on the contribution that primary medical services makes, or the performance of it, or the quality of it at this level? We get a lot of really important data from services which is a bit more mature in terms of data collection, but I think there's a lot going on under the surface in primary medical services that probably does need a bit more of a profile and linking in a little bit more. So again, we're talking about that.
Thanks, Alison. David, anything to add?
Just in the inform and potentially escalate area, linking to the last item on winter, and as Ruth has noted, practices continue to experience significant demand under unprecedented workforce challenges, and we've been working very closely with GPCB and the LMC in enabling practices to prioritise and dynamically risk assess their workload and work and be able to prioritise their workload without risk of income loss to practices, and that's been a really joined up piece of work across the system. And a note of thanks in terms of winter as well. We received an allocation of funding just after or just before Christmas for the development of acute respiratory infection hubs across the system, and within the space of 2 weeks, all of our primary care networks have been able to develop plans and implement plans for what's fancily called ARI hubs, and they're now up and running across the system. It's a phenomenal effort from practice to get that up and running. So a note of thanks and appreciation for that effort in the informed category. And just to escalate something that we've continued work around what's called supplementary services, so enhanced services that are provided that we commission directly from practices. We are looking at our supplementary services bundle across BNSSG. It's a significant amount of investment to practices. Again, working collaborative to ensure that we are targeting that resource in the most appropriate and in the most appropriate way to target inequalities. And that piece of work is taking slightly longer than we expect. So, but I think that might be something that we directly bring to the board over the coming months to make sure all fully decided on where that is.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Any questions for Alison or Dave? Okay, if I, oh, sorry, Jane.
Just a quickie, with regards to the capacity on the delegation of pharmacy, optometry, and the other one that's gone from my head. But yes, in terms of waiting lists and things, are we taking it all and then it's going to be fed through the funnel when it's all in place? How is it going to get implemented?
So support, commissioning, sorry, if you need commission, our commissioning support for delegated service will come through what's called the NHS England Commissioning Hub,
right,
and will be directly linked into them. But we are already getting a feed of that information into our primary care committee, and we'll start to see that through performance committee and into here as well. We are already getting that feed, and yes, it'll be for us to monitor and escalate forward.
I suppose it was Alison, you highlighting that question about are we cited enough? And I suppose my response to that would be probably no. In terms of thinking about the presentation we had about the locality and thinking about investment, do we really know where the real pressures are in primary care by locality? Do we know, looking at some of the numbers, not just looking at population numbers, but actually looking at access, where are there real high levels of vacancy? I don't think I know that. And I'm probably closer to primary care in many ways because obviously we work very closely. So I think it's a good question. Thinking
It was
about
a point I was going to raise in AOB, which is about our ICB. So content, presentations, length, location, online, in person, any of that as feedback would be helpful. You will know that the first one when we had presentations, most people here didn't get a chance to speak. And I think at the ICB, the biggest opportunity is for you to be able to speak. I do agree with you, Julie. If we could fill 2 days of data and of information, does that get aired at the committees, and that's the right place, or is here the right place? Now, if we're going to do that, we won't be able to do it all, but we might want to focus on certain themes in here, which might be worthwhile from time. And so what we do is we ask the committee chair maybe to elaborate on a theme and speak for a bit longer. I don't know. I mean, this is your committee. I'm just here to steer it. But anything around that, I am conscious that once we get a presenter here, we tell them 10 minutes and it's 35 minutes because 10 minutes in their world is I've got to bring 35 slides. And you know how long that will go on for. So it's just getting the balance right for me. Because I do agree with you. I think we'll never be cited on enough of the information. We need that to be able to make the right decisions. So Ellen, Dave, then Ruth, then Alison. You prompted something there.
Yeah, I think Julie actually, and it's in answer to Alison as well. And I feel we need more. I think you've got some really important stuff going on in your committee that is actually decision making. So it feels to me that it needs to be brought out a little bit more. No disrespect to Lisa, but we hear from Lisa sort of every time, which is absolutely crucial because she's performance director. So but I think I'd really like to hear from Dave and perhaps on the locality partnerships, which I think are. I know we hear from the locality partnerships, but I feel it would be really interesting to hear. What's the direction of travel? I think somebody asked the question. It was Alison actually. What are the plans? What are your goals? What are the milestones? It's sort of it needs to be brought out a little bit more. So I'd be really keen to hear from Dave and also bringing primary care into that. So that would be helpful.
So can I bring in Ruth, Dominic, and then go back to Dave and Alison in the committee? So Ruth.
I think we've got to be careful that we're clear about what it is we're talking about. Integrated locality partnerships are different to general practice, aren't they? And general practice is different to primary care. So from a general practice perspective, We have got a sick rep report that we collate on a weekly basis. We have got data that we can present in all sorts of different ways. So, you know, from a provider of general practice perspective, what's the question you're looking to answer, and we could, you know, we can share, but we do report in through the various mechanisms, through the flow. So, but I think our representation has been, it's been, we haven't been able to do that for ourselves as effectively as some of the other partners in the system have been historically, but that data is there. So I think there's a number of different elements. If it's quality, if it's performance, if it's future direction, you know, what is it that you're asking for or not asking for?
Just a brief point. We're of course having this conversation without yet having stood up the improvement groups, which are part of our planned operating model for next year. I think that would change the conversation, because then we can ask the improvement groups, come in and tell us the things you think we need to know, and that's a very
Do you know, in my head I'm thinking, if it's an escalated issue, absolutely it should be presented at the board. So we need to go into a bit more depth and presented by, if we do it routinely, what do I then take out of the committees when actually I want the committees to be digging into the detail? Now, I sit on most of the committees, so there's some read across with it, but you are right. I mean, you know, at chief exec level, are we going to get all the data presented to us? Well, we can't, but unless we're going to be here all day. Well, we're here all day anyway, unless it's going to be a 6-hour meeting rather than a 2-hour meeting. Julie.
I just wanted to say, for avoidance of doubt, I raised it in the spirit of actually to be supportive. Because I don't know where we should be focusing our energies, because you start to look at a local level and you say you've got inequalities, you've got poorer community services, you've got less resources in primary care, you've got the actually, therefore that is where we might need to focus some attention. I suppose it was Elizabeth's point, wasn't it, as when there's money, don't just assume you'll get it on weighted capitation. The same needs to apply. And I suppose that was the bit, so it wasn't a criticism of we're not getting information.
No, I think it's a good challenge.
Do we really understand where those problems are? Yeah. And it was just a light bulb moment for me, thinking actually, yeah, have I got some of the same problems in the same area? No wonder.
Come on, you can wait a while, and then I'll bring Stephen.
Shall I go?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's absolutely dependent on the health and care improvement group to have that cross-system understanding of the pressures, and we'll get there. I guess the point I think that Alison was making, we touched on today, is I think we, in terms of the quality group as well, we need to and Ruth, we've talked about this a lot. Let's not see primary care as something different and independent to the rest of the system. Yeah. Let's see our indicators, and let's see the pressure points coming through the quality report. Let's ensure that the workforce committee has, you know, is fully cited on those. So I think that's the point we're making, is let's integrate primary care better.
Absolutely, and that's the conversation you and I have been having, rather than take it outside and have it as a separate thing.
So I think that's what we need to bring, and the health and care improvement group clearly then Julie has a core role in that integration, the oversight of integration of pressure and priorities in the system, and in terms of locality partnerships, Ellen, again I could talk all day about that, and I did a brief presentation to Health Together executives a couple of weeks ago, and I've been talking to Shane about potentially a board seminar session on exactly the overarching development, so I'm very happy to bring that back, but maybe given time I won't start that today.
Thanks, Dave. But this has prompted a really good discussion about what do we focus on in here and how do we spend our time to best effect. So, Alison, do you have anything to add?
Yeah.
I'll bring Steve in then.
Thank Dave for helping me in what I was trying to say. That was excellent.
Mansplaining.
Yeah. And clearly it's not about more things, it's about integration, it's about being smart about what we see here and what the board takes as assurance from the committee and what the board might want to see itself for assurance. So it's a balance, isn't it? And I think when we're bringing 3 more services in, it just feels like a timing that there's an enormous amount going on in you know, the challenges we look at are all PCMs developing, are they maturing in the same way? Are they having consistent standards but keeping their individual nuances? are they all on process measures or are they on outcome measures? All of those things are the things that the committee should be doing on behalf of the board, and I think we are doing. But so I think I'm glad I prompted this discussion. I don't think it's about adding weighty tones at all. I think it's about being smarter in the way we have the whole picture.
Yeah, good point, thanks. Steve?
So, in my dream world, so I've sort of projected myself 10 years ahead, and we can't wait 10 years, but if we get the data set, the data from all of the parts of the system that we're trying to engage with, and we have some intelligent ways of presenting that. If this was our war room, and we had a problem somewhere, and we wanted to say, well, okay, where are our issues around diabetes? And we could go in and we could look by locality to see whether or not we've got hotspots. We could then say, well, okay, where have we got issues in terms of our ED departments? Where are most of our patients coming from? What's going on in that space? That's what we can do if we get our baseline data sets right and we can interrogate them in an intelligent way. So it's sort of a bit like public health observatory stuff at one level, but we need to be able to do this in live time and gather the data in that includes unitary authority data, social care data, because then we've got a full understanding of our population. And if we're ever to crack health inequalities, that's the stuff that we need. We need access to that. So we're sort of, I think, on the right road in getting there. We just haven't got all of it ready just yet, but it's coming. Because then we can use it to invest in the places that will have the biggest impact. But we'll have the evidence base to inform that investment.
I think that just goes back to the conversation we had in the closed session of the shared data investment in our shared data infrastructure to ensure that we could tie together. And it takes us right back to that point. You know, it will allow us to have those and actually allow any to be fully have those conversations about how best should we do something, and then we could model and say, well, we did that, look what it did with the numbers. So that's the journey we're absolutely on. And there's another layer of that's going on top of that, which we won't go today. We've also put a big bit in to be the host for the research base, to create an anonymous pool above that, which allows us to do further research. So you're dead right. Once we get that place, we could start saying, and we can anyway, but you could in more detail, what does diabetes look like in this postcode? And we can start that, but it doesn't connect them to what else, what's the other comorbidities, and what's going on in that postcode, and what's the social economic breakdown of that postcode. That's the kind of stuff you'd love to get into, and we could do that when we start looking at shared data architecture.
You can also draw in, sorry, I get excited, you can draw in the universities, because we know more about our population than practically anywhere else in the country, partly because of the work at Bristol University and the child of the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s. That's a database that is unbelievable in terms of the genomic stuff. So it's possible. It's possible to become a real hub in this space.
So the challenge back to me is the agenda for this meeting, the amount of time you give to it, the locations. If it's not yet creating the most value, you can tell me, because we'll change it. That some things have to come here, but I want to make sure that people sat around the table can contribute as much as they can. You won't be able to contribute to everything, but as much as you possibly can. The only thing I want to mention on AOB was, because we've gone through it in length in the private board, was around our engagement with the Integrated Care Partnership. Big thank you to Colin for all the work he's doing around supporting the strategy development there. Myself and Shane sit on the Integrated Care Partnership, which a lot of your chairs will, and others in the third sector and the voluntary sector. That is chaired by elected members from the, in rotation from the three different local authorities we've got within our footprint. But we'll keep you updated on developments on that. But Colin will bring back that strategy as it starts to develop. I thought just for the open board it was worth mentioning that. Any other business from anybody else that we haven't covered? So Sarah, just a quick one on Sarah Carr, just on dates and for the next meeting we've got in your diary.
2nd March.
Comes around quickly.
It does, doesn't it? And that will be at the Park Centre, West. It's on Daventry Road.
Yeah, it's a day out for you. Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you all for your time. We shall see you on. Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies. Question, but we've had one written one, Sarah, haven't we, that we've responded to. The gentleman can't be here today, but I think he's happy for us to write back, isn't he?
He is, and that was about whether the planned developments on the Western Rugby Rugby Club. Thank you. Western Rugby Club were that planned development would be dementia friendly, and his response to that is yes, we are building it within all the right guidelines and things, and there's considerable overlap between those guidelines and the dementia friendly guides. So we will be putting that back in response to the check you asked.
Great. Okay, thanks, Sarah. I don't know whether you, I mean, it's an opportunity before we close, whether you've got any questions for us?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I did submit one question in writing.
Yes, I don't know if you want to say what it was, but we haven't received a question from yourself about, I'm sorry, I can't remember, and I haven't got my emails up.
All right, yes, I'll in the context of, first of all, just let me say that my partner went recently to Southmead for treatment for skin cancer. She had to wait too long for it, but she received really excellent treatment. And I'm very appreciative indeed about what the NHS is managing to do in the current circumstances. To give my question some context in the discussion, in the context of the discussion that's gone on today, clearly from the Chief Executive's report and what Lisa said, it was a dreadful situation in December, and it's very good that things are improving. But as several people have said, the challenge is to make that a sustainable improvement. So my question is, what can the government do to make sure that improvements in ambulance waiting times, in waiting times for operational procedures, in staff recruitment, what can the government do to make sure all those things are sustainable and much better than they are now?
I suppose that's, again, one that's a question time session that will probably last for a few hours on it. But, you know, I think that all the things that we would look for is allowing us the opportunity in a locality to come together as a collaborative effort to try and provide joined up healthcare. That's a really important one for us. And the creation of integrated care boards is giving us a chance to do that. I think the other thing is workforce and finance. I mean, there's one thing about finance and infrastructure, but the other one about how do we sustain a workforce that can deliver for the demands of our communities going forward is one that cuts across all of our conversations, and that's one brighter people than me will need to discuss that and work it through. I don't know if there's anybody else who want to add to that, but I'd be quite happy to write a response back.
I was just going to say, I think there are two things, and I made reference to one of them earlier, which was around the recovery documents around urgent emergency care, which gives us a really good blueprint in terms of how we start to really make a difference. And one of the things that's really important about that document is actually using examples of how people have improved across the NHS. So it's not saying, you know, this is a national document everyone's work. It's actually coming out really in live examples where improvement's happening. So I think there's that document. And a year ago we had the elective equivalent of that, and I did make reference to those numbers when I presented, but we have made that elective improvement. It's not perfect, and you know, for any one of us, for our friends and family, we would not want them to wait, you know, 104 weeks, or as you experienced in terms of the cancer waits, but in that improvement journey. And I think those are two really key bits that the government's helped. But the key reference around workforce is a real challenge for us, and that's both a national challenge, but it's also a local challenge about how we support and improve retention for our staff. You know, there are some real issues in terms of things like the cost of housing, particularly in this area, that will play into that retention as well.
But thank you, and to challenge the question, probably one of the most challenging of the day, but I appreciate it. Anything else for anyone before we finish? Okay, thanks very much, and see you all in the beginning of March.